ahead, that's the Blue Angels. They are warming up for Seafair this weekend, and they've been running overhead here and there this afternoon, so that's a good thing. Uh, a lot going on this summer, as I mentioned before. This week I'm going to talk about three changes in government policy that have been in the news this week, and all three have a real impact or may have a real impact on different elements of government activity here in Washington State. All three begin, to some degree, back in DC with changes in federal policy or law, and then will have an effect on three critical issues here in our state. First, I'm going to talk about something a little obscure. You may have heard about it in the news. The Environmental Protection Agency, back in DC, the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, has made a major change in its policy around a thing called a, quote, endangerment finding, unquote. This is not law, it's bureaucratic rule, and it tracks back to the Obama administration, so about 14, 15 years ago. The EPA then created this endangerment finding that held that carbon dioxide emissions, carbon outputs, as you sometimes hear them called, pollution, carbon dioxide pollution, was a critical threat. The endangerment part of the endangerment finding was a critical danger to human health and the environment and people's well-being. From that bureaucratic ruling 12 or 15 years ago, a whole generation of bad bureaucratic rules and in some cases laws at the various state levels around the country have followed. And here in Washington, we've had a whole bunch of bad ideas that have followed from that federal EPA bureaucratic rule. The cockeyed Climate Commitment Act, our carbon tax scheme, came from it. Now that is state law. Other things in our state that aren't state law have flowed from it. Bureaucratic rules here, primarily made through the State Department of Ecology. Remember, our state's Department of Ecology is the equivalent of the federal Environmental Protection Agency. Their names are slightly different, but they serve the similar function at the state and federal level. So the State Department of Ecology has done various goofy bureaucratic rules, regulation systems, all on this premise from the federal government that there was this endangerment finding about carbon dioxide pollution. You may have remembered that at one point the previous governor, Mr. Inslee, wanted to ban the sale of all diesel-powered trucks, commercial trucks, tractor-trailer trucks, because of diesel was bad, bad, bad. Ultimately, they couldn't implement that scheme. It was so stupid, and it was restricting business, transportation in our state so badly, the state backed off that one a little bit. But the state still has on some of its bureaucratic rule books a ban on all gas or diesel powered vehicles. That's supposed to happen in 2030 or 2035 or the 12th of never or whatever. And all of these bad ideas stem from this EPA endangerment finding about carbon dioxide and carbon pollution. Well, what happened this week is the new head of the EPA, a guy called Lee Zeldin, former congressman from New York and very well-known guy on the East Coast, not known so well here on the West Coast. He's the head of the EPA now under the Trump administration, and Zeldin has said he's reversing that Obama-era endangerment finding about carbon dioxide pollution. He said it's not that he doesn't think pollution exists, he understands there's pollution, and he wants to help protect the environment, but he thinks the particulars of this bureaucratic rule are unlawful, and more importantly, not science-based. Basically, the new head of the EPA is saying it was junk science from the Obama administration, and many people agree with him. So that is going to have some interesting effects here in Washington. on a lot of the radical environmentalist, green energy, green economy projects that have been screwing up Washington State's economy and laws for a decade plus. I'll have to add to this equation too, the trick that both the previous governor and current governor are using of going around the legislature and getting executive branch agencies like the Washington State Building Code Council to use their bureaucratic rules to advance green energy agendas that make getting a building permit harder and more expensive. Those are now going to be on the chopping block too, because of the change at the federal government level, which had enabled all of this nonsense here at the state. The same week that this change happened at the EPA, there was another major policy change. This came from the president himself in the form of an executive order. President Trump issued an executive order saying that the federal government will no longer allow federal government dollars, federal taxpayer dollars, to be used in support of so-called housing first homeless housing projects. Housing first is a political ideology, and it has basically just infected all homeless housing projects, at least here in Washington State. The idea behind housing first, as the name implies, is when someone is in the throes of addiction to illegal drugs, the best thing to do is give them government-paid housing first, and then encourage them to get sober while they're living in a free to them government-owned apartment or housing. This has been tried in various places, including in Southwest Washington. It has failed everywhere it's been tried. When you allow people in the throes of active addiction to methamphetamine or fentanyl or whatever it might be, to live in government-owned apartments, housing, for free to them, it's not free, of course, taxpayers are paying for it, the housing, the apartment buildings tend to become magnets for all kinds of illegal and criminal activities. The addicts will sometimes deal out of their apartment, or they'll run fence operations for stolen property to raise money to get their drugs. What we found in my part of the state that I represent in Olympia as a legislator is we experimented with this. We had one in Kelso, Washington, this housing first shelter, and it became the hot spot of crime in the region. The people living in the free to them apartments were some of the biggest, most active criminals in the region. It was a terrible thing. It's now since closed, and our focus in Southwest Washington is on treatment first. If people are going to get government-owned apartments free to them, it's best that we require at least the commitment to being in treatment and trying to beat their addiction. Get clean. And if you don't get clean, if you're actively using, and certainly if you're dealing, you're out. And this is a more effective way in the long run to help get people off the streets, help them beat the monkey, as they call it, beat their addiction, and get back to a healthier place and a more productive life. So Trump's executive order saying no more money to housing first is going to filter down and really upset some apple carts here in our Washington, where we are heavily invested in the housing first ideology. You're going to hear a lot of weeping and moaning from so-called homeless housing experts saying that this hurts the system. It doesn't. There's been a lot of frustration in our state about how inefficient our homeless housing dollars are being spent. By moving away from housing first and toward treatment first, I think you will see a more effective use of the money we spend as a state on homeless housing. And last point here, our Washington Administrative Code, again, this is not law, this is bureaucratic rule here in Washington State, gives an advantage to housing first programs over sober living and other forms of housing when it comes to receiving government grants through the state of Washington Department of Commerce. The executive order from the federal level is going to put pressure on that bureaucratic rule here in Washington of giving housing first projects preference. We need to get rid of that WAC, that administrative rule altogether, to be compliant with the new federal guidelines. And the third issue that's been in the news this week is this matter of the sanctuary state. The previous governor and the current governor have both made a lot of talk about how Washington is a sanctuary state. This is a matter, a little bit of law. The controversial Keep Washington Working Act, which is a misleading title of that law, does prohibit law enforcement in Washington state from cooperating with federal law enforcement agencies to enforce immigration law. But the rest of the so-called sanctuary state policy isn't law. It's a series of rules and executive orders and resolutions that say that Washington is a sanctuary state for illegal aliens. Lately, in the last few weeks, a number of counties in our state, up to about 7 or 8 right now, have made resolutions or public statements that they are not sanctuary counties. And although the current governor, Mr. Ferguson, talk about how we're a sanctuary state, these counties say they are not, that they are law-abiding counties, and that they will instruct their sheriffs and their county-level agencies to cooperate with federal law enforcement agencies on matters of immigration law enforcement. Now, in some cases, these statements are sort of a more general statement of principle, less a real local ordinance, but they're important nonetheless. And I and the Washington State Republican Party are encouraging people in Washington to contact your county commissioners or county council members if you live in a county that has a council system of government, and ask them to make a statement, make a resolution, or even an ordinance saying that your county is law-abiding and will cooperate with federal authorities in enforcing immigration law. I think this is a good counterposition to the virtue signaling and, frankly, lawlessness that Mr. Bob Ferguson and his cronies support out of Olympia. So we'll be talking more about this in the coming weeks, but it's a major project, and a priority of the WAGOP is to encourage local officials to follow the law and help cooperate with enforcing immigration law. That's an important thing. And all of this comes to the fine point on a great concern at all levels of government here in Washington State that federal government dollars are going to be withheld from our homeless housing projects, from our public health projects, and our law enforcement efforts if Washington State chooses to disregard federal law and policy. As you know, our current governor, Mr. Ferguson, and our current state attorney general, Mr. Brown, are trying to make names for themselves by disregarding and breaking federal law and disregarding federal policy on a number of issues: healthcare, homeless housing, immigration. And what we want to make sure is that we minimize the damage that Ferguson and Brown and their cronies are going to cause by disregarding federal law. That starts at the grassroots level with you, and it starts at the local level with your city and county governments. So there's a lot going on. This was a heavy policy week. 3 major policy points: the matter of carbon pollution, the matter of homeless housing, and the matter of our so-called sanctuary state lawlessness. These are heavy issues, but the good news for conservatives and Republicans is we're on the right side of all 3 of these issues, and we are going to be able to encourage good reform up and down the government system so that we have a better operating government for the people of Washington State. That's it for this week. Until we talk again, stay strong and be well.